Trump's 48-hour war ultimatum. Can the Strait of Hormuz stay open? A 48-hour deadline. A world-famous oil choke point on the brink. And the President of the United States threatening to obliterate another country's power plants if his demands aren't met. This is the latest flashpoint in the US-Israel-Iran war that's already shaking the Middle East and the global economy. Welcome to this channel. Today we're breaking down Trump's 48-hour ultimatum to Iran, the escalating strikes around the Strait of Hormuz and Tehran, and what a shutdown of this waterway could mean for oil prices, inflation, and everyday life from New York to Karachi. 3 weeks ago, the US and Israel launched what the White House called major combat operations against Iran. Instead of a full invasion, it was a wave of airstrikes, missile strikes, and drone attacks targeting Iranian military infrastructure, missile sites, and air defense networks at the same time. Iran responded with missile and drone attacks against U.S. bases in the Gulf and against Israeli cities, including a powerful strike near Israel's main nuclear research facility. Over 100 people were reportedly injured in Israel, and the mood in Tel Aviv shifted from deterrence to retaliation. By the end of these weeks, the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical oil routes, had effectively become a war zone. Iran began restricting or blocking commercial shipping, threatening oil tankers and gas carriers that normally move about a fifth of the world's oil and gas through this narrow channel. Then came President Donald Trump's ultimatum. On social media, he told Iran it has 48 hours to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz without any further threats, or the United States will hit and obliterate Iran's power plants, starting with the biggest one. That's not traditional diplomacy. That's a deadline written in military language. Power plants are the backbone of a modern economy. If Iran's major electricity infrastructure is hit, we're talking about citywide blackouts, collapsing water systems, and crippled hospitals and refineries. Iran has already warned that any attack on its energy infrastructure will trigger counter-strikes on US and Israeli energy and desalination facilities across the region. In other words, if Trump follows through, we're not just looking at a blackout in Iran. We're looking at a chain reaction of strikes on pipelines, refineries, gas terminals, and even basic utilities in Gulf states. Trump's move is calculated shock and awe. He wants Iran to back down fast, before markets panic and oil prices spiral out of control. So why does one narrow strait between Iran and Oman matter so much? The Strait of Hormuz is about 21 miles wide at its narrowest, yet it handles roughly 20% of the world's oil and a huge share of its liquefied natural gas. Hundreds of tankers pass through here every day, carrying Iranian, Saudi, Iraqi, and Emirati crude. If the strait is blocked, or even just heavily restricted, insurance costs for ships jump, oil prices spike, and import-dependent economies from Europe to South Asia face inflation, fuel shortages, and potential unrest. Right now the strait is mostly shut, with Iran floating threats and using maritime militias and drones to keep international shipping on edge. That's enough to justify Trump's ultimatum in Washington and Tel Aviv, but it also raises the risk of a wider regional war. While Trump's deadline dominated headlines, Israel launched fresh airstrikes inside Iran, targeting military facilities and missile launch sites near Tehran itself. This marks a major escalation. Historically, Israel has tried to keep strikes inside Iran somewhat covert. Now, with visible attacks on Iran's capital, Tel Aviv is sending a message. Iran's heartland is not off limits. Iran has pledged swift and decisive retaliation. Tehran's military command warns that any attack on its energy infrastructure will trigger a wave of attacks on U.S. and allied forces, as well as on critical energy and desalination infrastructure in the Gulf. We're watching a classic escalation loop. US threatens Iran's power grid, Israel bombs inside Iran. Iran threatens Gulf energy hubs, and regional powers brace for missiles, drones, and blackouts. This isn't just a US-Israel-Iran triangle. Major powers across the world are watching, reacting, and quietly maneuvering. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait are on high alert. They fear being dragged into the war while still depending on free oil routes through the Strait of Hormuz. China needs Iranian oil and worries about skyrocketing prices if the strait shuts down completely. Beijing has already called for restraint while quietly building alternative energy routes. Russia benefits from any chaos that weakens U.S. influence in the Middle East and could position itself as a mediator. Europe, meanwhile, is caught between condemning Iran's aggression and fearing the cost of soaring oil prices on their economies. This is not a simple two-sided conflict. It's a multi-layered chessboard, with every major power deciding how much chaos they can live with and how far they dare push. Trump's 48-hour ultimatum is a ticking clock and a psychological weapon. It's designed to pressure markets, allies, and Iran's leadership all at once. First, Iran could partially reopen the strait, send a symbolic signal of de-escalation, and then slowly tighten restrictions again later. Second, Iran could call the bluff, ignore the threat, and dare the US to escalate, risking a grinding war across the Gulf. Third, the US might launch limited strikes on one or two Iranian power facilities, then pause to negotiate from a position of strength. None of these paths are truly safe. Even a limited strike on Iran's power grid can trigger a wider conflict. And even if the strait reopens, the fear of a future shutdown will keep oil prices volatile and markets nervous. You might live thousands of miles from the Strait of Hormuz, but this conflict can still reshuffle your life. If the strait stays unstable or partially closed, expect higher fuel prices, more expensive flights, and costlier shipping everywhere. Refined oil products are embedded in food transport, fertilizer production, and manufacturing, so inflation can quietly climb. Global markets also hate uncertainty. A war zone around the world's most important oil route can trigger stock market swings, bond sell-offs, and currency volatility impacting savings, investments, and even job markets. When Trump talks about obliterating power plants, and Iran threatens Gulf desalination plants, this isn't just a regional drama. It's a global risk that can reshape your gas bill, your grocery bill, and your economy. As the 48-hour clock ticks down, the world is watching one narrow channel more closely than almost any other piece of geography. Earth. Trump's ultimatum, Israel's strikes on Tehran, and Iran's warnings of retaliation are building blocks of a possible regional war that could reshape energy markets, global alliances, and the balance of power in the Middle East. If you want to stay ahead of how this crisis evolves, subscribe and hit the bell. We'll be tracking the next moves around the Strait of Hormuz, the reactions of major global powers, and what this means for inflation, energy security, and your daily life. Until next time, this is your Global Affairs channel, cutting through the noise, one geopolitical flashpoint at a time.